As I sometimes do, I'm going to beg for y'all's indulgence, those who are going to hang around and actually listen to this nonsense that I'm about to spout here. God bless you if you listen to this from beginning to end, but God forgive you if you don't. No, no, I kid. If you don't, I understand. But thank you for those who do in advance, and also I've actually had people, you do these videos and you get kind of self-conscious because there's always commenters who come on with their ridiculous complaints. I've posted videos before where I've had nasal congestion and had people come on saying, "Ooh, gross. There's all this snot in your nose. I can tell from the way you're talking and the way you're sniffing, and it's gross, man. It's just gross." So, if that bothers you, if I sound nasally congested, I am nasally congested. If I sound like it and that bothers you, then please turn off now. Anyhow, after that dubious preamble, let's begin. I'm going to try to, I don't exactly know how to phrase the the good start, hey. uh, uh, ah. I don't exactly know how to talk about what I'm talking about here. I don't know what to say about it. I'm sort of groping for the way to describe this phenomenon that I'm attempting to describe. So this will be hopefully I'll land on something here that's useful. I watched a documentary about the band Devo. I think it was on Netflix. And I watched after that a documentary that was just on YouTube about some like proto new wave or punk band in Wichita, Kansas called The Embarrassment, which I'd never heard of before. I didn't know them at all. They were around in the early 80s and had some sort of limited fan base. They never quite broke through the way that some other bands did. And then I started watching something like a documentary about the punk scene in Chicago. So I watched a bunch of videos or a bunch of documentaries, or 3 documentaries, I should say, not a bunch, specifically 3, from this era that, it's kind of a part of my childhood, although I was a little too young for the very early stage of punk and what became known as new wave, which was really sort of my my thing. And I've always kind of gravitated towards the new wave sound and the new wave attitude, and even though it's not really new anymore, it's 50 years old. But anyway, and it sort of derived from punk, which was more primal and I think less interesting, but still had something to it that I enjoy to this day, something in the attitude of it, and the spirit of it, and so forth. So what I enjoy about the era, I should say first, what I've always enjoyed about the punk new wave era is that while a lot, indeed, most of these bands, when were, if they were political at all, they were overwhelmingly left leaning. They take for instance the Dead Kennedys, who I'm not a big fan of, but I enjoy the humor that I know permeates a lot of their songs, like California Uber Alles, and other songs of theirs, and they weren't alone. There were a lot of other bands that were like that, and some of them were, went the other direction. Obviously there was the far right. The far right was represented in the early punk scene, although it was, the minority, and was looked down on by the rest. And there were also some in the punk scene, like the Dead Milkmen, if you can call them punk, or the Meat Men, who were just were like kind of anti-PC before there was PC, before PC was really all that settled a thing. The Meat Men came on and with a song celebrating the murder of John Lennon, mocking homosexuals, and like not because they were not because out of conviction, but just to piss liberals off. And so there was that sort of thing. And what you found in general, I think, in the early punk scene was just a sense of humor. And I still think in those days you could be liberal and have a sense of humor because liberalism wasn't this killjoy thing that it became, or wasn't this killjoy sort of, okay, everybody be on your best behavior. It wasn't this hall monitor kind of thing that it's become. It was like, if you were being naughty, you were, you were liberal or leftist. It was a way of going against the grain, because the establishment was still, there was still a right to speak of. There was still conservatism, like cultural conservatism, that hadn't been almost completely eroded at that time. That's something that's gone. It's utterly gone from liberalism, and even from bands that call themselves punk today, and are left-leaning. They're not like that at all. They're not humorous. They don't have songs, humorous songs about, the governor of California being a liberal Nazi, being a new wave Nazi, who wants to gas your uncool niece, and make your kids meditate at school, like the dead Kennedys sang about in California Uber Alles. And even this gets more to what I was noticing in these videos that I saw. Even those who remain from that day, these are people who are even older than me. So we're talking about pretty old guys who are getting kind of up there. Although I guess a couple of these videos were a little bit older. They're like from 10 or 15 years ago, so they were younger then, obviously, as we all were. But what I was noticing in these, to my dismay, although it confirmed something of what I was thinking, although I didn't think it would be quite this bad. I didn't think it would be quite this pronounced. But that the bands who in those days had a sense of humor, the guys who had a sense of humor now, it's like they're embarrassed by how offensive they were at the time. For example, in the documentary I was watching about the Chicago punk scene, there was some band, I don't even remember their name, but it was an anti-Nazi song, but it was called "All Jews Must Die," and it was, it was satirical, but in a very blunt and not very subtle sort of way, and it was it was indulging in, it was being offensive to make a point, but of course that wouldn't pass muster by today's woke standards. And the guys in the band were like trying to distance themselves from it and saying, "Oh well, it was just a joke, but it wasn't funny. I know it wasn't funny now." Like they have to, they feel the need to say that. They can't just stand by it. They can't just say, "Yeah, we wrote that song and this is what we intended, and some people took it the wrong way, but that's not our fault. It's not my problem." I mean, which is much more of a punk attitude, but to have this kind of embarrassment about it, like to be like, "Oh well, we know better now," it's just embarrassing. You talk about being cringeworthy. That makes me cringe. Um, that makes me embarrassed for these people. When you can't stand by something that you did, that was a part of the scene back then, and was valid in its way, even if it's not brilliant, even if it's crude and blunt and unsubtle, and kind of stupid. um Stand by it, like, just, or don't apologize for it, or come on, have some pride. But uh what I found is, for a lot of the people who were being interviewed in all of these documentaries, so let's start with the Devo documentary, which I think you can still, well, I'm sure you can still see it if you have Netflix. So Devo, if you don't know about them, these were guys who wore like flower pots on their heads, or like, wore these like futuristic jumpsuits, and sang robotically, and they had, you've probably heard the song "Whip It" if you haven't heard any other song of theirs. This is obviously a quirky, offbeat, you would think humorous, group of guys. But I watched this documentary, and this is like, they were from Ohio. Was it Dayton? I'm sorry that I don't remember the exact city. It might have been Dayton. It might have been somewhere else in Ohio, but it was like an industrial town, conservative sort of town, with a lot of steel workers and church going types, and they just had they had this spiteful contempt for everything middle American, and I don't understand. It seems like the worst of it all is they still have it to this day. Like, these are guys in their 60s now, and they're still, like, they sound like they're 19. They sound like some angry 19-year-old Antifa whose father voted for Trump, and they just have this. Well, I mean, first of all, I would say it was surprising and disappointing to see that it doesn't make me dislike their music, or feel any differently about their music, because the music is the music. It doesn't matter to me. Just like I can watch a movie, and even if I hate the actor, even if I think the actor is really obnoxious, and repellent, I can still enjoy his performance in something, i.e. Sean Penn, let's say. He might be the most obvious example of that. Someone who I think has talent, but who's, every time you hear him talk, is like, shut the hell up. Shut up. But with Devo, you would think, because of their wacky aesthetic, that they would just be more fanciful. They would be more like, yeah, I can understand them being liberal and standing out, and feeling at odds with a conservative upbringing and whatnot. But to just be so so bitter about Christianity, so bitter about people who vote Republican, so bitter about Reagan, all this just cliche kind of stuff that you'd forgive maybe in a 19 or 20-year-old or 25-year-old, in the late 70s, early 80s. Um, but now, in their 60s, and advancing, towards towards uh, towards old age, you'd think there'd be more of a, well, we got a little carried away, or we were a little angry, or but it was just part of growing, part of our maturing process. And now we see things a little bit more. I don't know. Now we're a little more tolerant of people we disagree with, or but their animating principles seem to be built so much on looking down on the the conservative majority of their of their region. So, like, oh man, we can't wait to get away, to get to New York City, where we can be among our own. This whole, it's like reverse provincialism. It's I don't know what to call it. Snobbery. It's a sort of thing that is understandable to a certain extent. If you're, and I can relate to it, because I was that way. I grew up in a fairly, I guess, fairly conservative, suburban Atlanta neighborhood. And I was quirky and offbeat and, artsy, and I had, grew my hair long, and I had my little opinions, my teenage opinions. And I can understand, being that way in your adolescence or even your early adulthood. But at some point you gotta grow up. And it seems like the guys in Devo just never did. They still have this hateful bitterness towards middle America, conservative middle America, that I don't understand. I can't connect with, and it's disappointing. It's disappointing to see it. I don't demand that they agree with me. I'm not like the left. That's a difference. That's a large difference between if you're libertarian or conservative oriented. You generally don't demand that even you don't demand that even your heroes, and Devo was never they were never my heroes, but I liked them. But you don't generally demand that they just agree with you to the letter about everything. And if they're not with you about something, then you just can't stand with them anymore, and you take a stand against their small-minded, just the same way that liberals turn on someone like J.K. Rowling just because she is against one of the things that they're, one of their sacred articles of belief, i.e. transgenderism. And it's not even like she thinks that transgender people are bad or should be excluded from things. She just doesn't think that they should, that if they're biologically male, that they should be in women's spaces, in women's locker rooms. And for just that, you agree with me on 95% of things. I sort of think, okay, you're you're basically with me. We're basically on the same side here. We can work together. But on the left, it's like, no, if you're not with me on everything, then you're bad. You must conform to everything that I adhere to, or you're the enemy. You're not that way. You're a little more mellow, or at least I am, and I think the majority of conservative types are these days. Maybe it wasn't always the case, but definitely is the case today among non-liberal types. I won't say, like, I'll include libertarian-leaning types or classical liberals, or whatever. That generally, if you disassociate, if you're not a part of the mainstream left, then you're seen as evil and the enemy, by the left. But if you're not on the left, then you're sort of, okay, well, this person doesn't agree with me, but I still like his art, or this person doesn't agree with me on this, but agrees with me on that, and we can work together. I can live with that. It's interesting how things have worked out that way. The sort of sclerosis of this hardening of not just belief, but this hardening of this demand that your beliefs be shared, or else the person is worthless and has to be cast aside, and it cannot be. You can't even you can't even listen to their music. You can't even read their books. You can't even watch their movies. You're just cutting yourself off from so much when you do that. It's not a good way to be. It's just, you've got to. But that's getting off the track a little here. That was a little bit of a tangent in this ramble of mine. So what I saw, though, that was like that was a common thing. What I saw and what dismayed me about the guys in Devo and their attitudes was something that was really shared to one extent or another by almost everybody that they interviewed in these other two documentaries. The one about this band called The Embarrassment, out of Wichita, this more offbeat punk rock or new wave band, or whatever from that era. They were saying a lot of the same things, like, oh, well, we live in this conservative church going town, and we're a little different, and we're we want to bring art and music, and we're not just going to become we're not just going to wear a suit and work a 9-to-5 job and be join the man, or whatever, or however you put it. Again, you could understand that to a degree, but the ubiquity of that kind of sentiment, and in Chicago, because Chicago is like Chicago is a very it's a pretty liberal city, and I think it's always been a pretty, or not always, but certainly in the last 50, 60, 70 years, it's it's the heart of the Democrat machine. Mayor Daley, for crying out loud, Chicago. Yeah, it's like I know that it's more nuanced than that. I know there are suburban areas that are more conservative and just like everywhere else, but the way that these punk, these early devotees to punk in Chicago were talking about the way things were back then was like, oh well, these REO Speedwagon fans, excuse me, these dinosaur rock bands. They didn't use that particular term, but the kind of people who would listen to what we today call classic rock. The REO Speedwagon, Journey, Kansas, that whole those kinds of bands, those kinds of non-punk bands, and the punks all talked about how they hated these kinds of people, and how they would be they probably did take shit from jocks and meatheads, or in high school, if they were going around with their spiked hair and their mohawks and their never mind the bollocks t-shirts or what have you. Every time I laugh, I cough. Sorry about that. But it's understandable to not like the people who are bullying you. I get that. So it's not like I'm saying, I want to make it clear that I'm not demanding that these people feel about things the way that I do now, as a man in his 50s. But again, it's shocking and dismaying how many so many of the people that are interviewed, they talk to people in both this documentary and the one about the embarrassment. They talk to people in the bands, they talk to people who are just a part of the scene at the time, and these are these aging people, talking about still going on in the same kind of way, except even worse now, as I said, because you can't even be outrageous, you can't even be offensive anymore, which is what punk was supposed to be. That was what it was about. It was about being offensive. If you weren't, outraging people, what were you doing? How could you call yourself a punk? And that went both ways. They would of course run into conflict with young Republicans and so forth, but they would also clash with liberal types. If you were a true punk, you would, like I was saying with the Dead Kennedys song, and that's hardly that's hardly the exception to the rule. That was pretty much the rule back then. But now these same people who in their youth were more able to be, in the midst of their snottiness, their tribalism, they still had a sense of humor, and I remember being tribal. I remember being in high school and just, thinking anybody who wore like a heavy metal t-shirt was an enemy. In my youth, I remember feeling that way when I was 16. Okay. I don't feel that way now, obviously, but I don't feel that way about people who wear any kind of apparel or go about in any kind of way. Even girls with purple hair and nose rings, they're not all bad. They can't all be bad. I don't just automatically think, oh boy, here we go. I give them the benefit of the doubt. And sometimes, I'm rewarded for giving that benefit of the doubt. But these people are still talking about the same people they hated in their teens and 20s, uh, feeling like the same way about them now. And they still, in some ways glorify, the kind of things that they did in their youth that you would think they would have, like, oh yeah, we had this club and we were all taking drugs and people were having sex in the bathrooms and people were throwing up and in these little alcoves and we were doing all kinds of crazy degenerate things, but it was so cool. That's why it was cool. You would think that they would be more like, yeah, that was I don't know about that. We went a little far with some of the things we were doing. you want to see some kind of perspective on it, because you can't live that way. When you get older, you can't live that. You can't party that hard anymore. But they were talking about it with this. So many of them were talking about like having this club that was all for the punks, and they were talking about it in a way that really seemed naive. Worse than naive, because naive people should know better. That's the or shouldn't or don't know any better. That's the definition of being naive. But these people, I thought, should know better. Because they're old. I mean, they're older now. They have more lived experience. They should not be glorifying the behavior of their youth so categorically as they're doing. They should be more aware of the negative things about it. And the only thing that they can be negative about now is the fact that the only is what was their what I think was their greatest virtue, was that they could be outrageous. And now they can't write a song that outrages people who misunderstand what they're trying to do. Write a song about from the Nazis' point of view, but making fun of Nazis. But people don't understand they're making fun of Nazis, so they think they really are Nazis. And they wear World War II helmets and stuff, so that adds to the misunderstanding. But that's something that's the one thing they have to separate themselves from is the fact that they were outrageous in a way that you're not allowed to be anymore. That if you are that outrageous now, it's a faux pas. It's like a terrible. It's worse than a faux pas. A faux pas is like a little thing, isn't it? This is a major faux pas. If you have a sense of humor, even if you're as liberal as can be, as left leaning as can be, if you have a sense of humor about things and use certain words, then you're called upon to apologize. And you all know what I'm talking about here. The way things have been for the last few years, especially. So I think to bring my thoughts to a close, the kind of tribalism that comes naturally, especially to the young, because you want to find your own. And I mean, in some ways, I know tribalism is just a human thing. It's like you gravitate towards those. You want unity. You want to feel unity with those with whom you share a bond, whether that bond is based in a common set of beliefs or in a common nationality, or however you define it. You gravitate towards your people, the people you see as your people. When you're a teenager, you do that. Like, it's very uncommon not to do that. And you can see these punks, in their teens or early 20s, early to mid 20s, you know, thinking that they're doing something really great. Oh, well, this is a place where you can be yourself. This is a place where you can have individuality. But then that's the way they talk about it now. Like you didn't have to, you didn't have to conform here. You could, but of course you had to conform. But what you had to conform to was just the punk sensibility. Like they were talking about, oh, people came into the club one week, wearing suits and ties, and then they would get rid of their suits and get rid of their ties, and saying that, oh, well, you're becoming more of a nonconformist by losing the apparel that you came in with. No, you're becoming more of a conformist with the aesthetic of what's being promoted in this club. And you don't want to look like a square. I guess they still called them squares back then, maybe. Well, that seems like more of a 60s thing. But I think it was still around back then. So anyway, I think a lot of people just never grow up. That's what I take from these documentaries. That's just that a lot of people who you think age would teach them something about their provincial attitudes, because these attitudes, even though they're I don't know what else to call them besides provincial. I know provincial generally means conservative, or like somebody from the province who's a stick in the mud, set in their ways, who don't like anything that's new. But this is the kind of provincialism that gravitates towards the new thing and hates anybody immediately thinks that anybody who's not part of their scene is evil, or is contemptible, somebody to look down on. You would think that when these people are getting into their 50s and 60s, that they would see it a little differently. The ones who survived, the ones who didn't just crash out and didn't meet the fate of like Sid Vicious and many others. Just the ones who actually managed to get out, to pull out of that and go on. You would think that they would be able to retain what was good and discard of what was bad. But instead, it's almost the opposite. As I've said, they what they keep from their youth is all the crappy attitudes that they had, and what they change from, if they change at all, is, oh, we're so embarrassed that we use the word faggot in a song, or that we we just the one thing that was the most refreshing about punk is now what they want to do away with. So it's kind of depressing. Ultimately, it's kind of depressing. And those are my thoughts. And I'm almost 40 minutes into this ramble, so I'll end it here. Thank you so much for watching to the end. Thank you. God bless.